Conversation 3. Physiology. Doctor. The body is the house of the soul. In an upper story, confined to an inner chamber, closely imprisoned and having no communication with the external world, except through the medium of the life principle, resides in our immortal being. But there is no mention of a double life in the account of man's creation. Genesis 2:7 says that the Lord God formed man out of the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living soul. The Hebrew word in that passage for life is used in the plural, so that your objection but confirms the physiological view. It should read, breathed into his nostrils the breath of lives. Is the life principle immortal as well as the soul? I believe it is, but only in consequence of its connection with the soul to which it is subservient. It is an intermediate between spirit and matter, presenting to us certain phenomena by which we are enabled to recognize its possession of 7 distinct properties. These are vital affinity, vivification, mobility, irritability, instinct, sympathy, sensibility. The first 5 are common to all animated nature, plants as well as animals. The last 2, in consequence of requiring a nervous system for their development, belong only to animals. Vital affinity and vivification are used in the organization of matter. Mobility is the power of originating motion, as shown in the circulation of the sap and shrinking of the mimosa. Irritability or excitability is the power of giving and receiving impressions, of acting upon matter, and of being in turn acted upon by it, and is one of the most important of all. The instinctive property of plants has already been mentioned. That of animals needs no illustration. Sympathy and sensibility possess names sufficiently explanatory of their powers. But have not animals a separate principle of instinct besides a life power? They have not. Coleridge, who is the best authority on this subject, remarks that instinct is the power of selecting and adapting means to proximate ends, and illustrates the point by taking the stomach of a caterpillar, which he observes has the power of selecting the appropriate means, that is, the assimilable part of the vegetable congesta, to the proximate end, which is in the growth or reproduction of the insect's body. It does this by the vital power of the stomach. From the power of the stomach, he passes to the power exerted by the whole animal, traces it, wandering from spot to spot and plant to plant, till he finds the appropriate vegetable, and again on this chosen vegetable he marks it, seeking out and fixing on the part of the plant, bark, leaf, or petal, suited to its nourishment, or, should the animal have assumed the butterfly form, to the proper place of depositing its eggs, and making provision for the sustenance of the little animals that shall emerge from them. The power thus exhibited of selecting and adapting means to proximate ends. Oh, good, I'm glad you like it. It's a book about hypnotism. According to circumstances, he considers as a higher species of adaptive power and calls it instinct. Then, citing anecdotes from the writing of zoologists, he proves in the lower animals a power of selecting and adapting the proper means to the proximate ends, according to varying circumstances. And this yet higher species of adaptive power he calls instinctive intelligence. In addition to these, he says that he finds one other character common to the highest and lowest, namely, that the purposes of all are all manifestly predetermined by the peculiar organization of the animals, and both actions and purposes are in a necessitated reference to the preservation and continuance of the particular animal or the progeny. There is selection but not choice, volition rather than will. Hi there, I don't know what that language is, but thanks for your comment. I suppose wild men have their instinctive faculties best developed, and that man, in proportion as he becomes civilized or under the dominion of reason, loses these powers. You must remember that the manifestations of instinct depend on the peculiar organization of the animal. Man is not fitted to live in a wild state, for then he is of all animals the most helpless. But Coleridge speaks directly on this point, and I will give you his words, premising that he defines understanding as the faculty that judges by the senses. He says that if we suppose the adaptive power in its highest state, instinctive intelligence, to coexist with reason, free will, and self-consciousness, it instantly becomes understanding. In other words, that understanding differs indeed from the noblest form of instinct, not in itself or in its own essential properties, but in consequence of its coexisting with far higher powers of a diverse kind, in one and the same subject. Instinct in a rational, responsible, and self-conscious animal is understanding. Having now reviewed the characters of the servants in the house of the soul, we will glance at their offices in the building and at the building itself. In comparing the human form to a self-moving house, the bones and muscles should be represented as beams and pillars, the stomach as the kitchen, the lungs as the ventilator, etc., etc. The house must be furnished with bells and wires to convey news, receive messages, and connect all the parts together in a common whole. Such offices are performed by the senses. The skeleton of the human body is composed of 248 bones, each of which is modeled with the utmost care for the various offices it has to perform. So weak and so close a relation does one bear to another, that an anatomist can tell from seeing one or another, or in some cases even a part of one, what the utmost certainty the general form and habits of the animal to which it belongs. A happy illustration of this fact was shown some years since in England by Mr. Conybeare, a philosopher of considerable eminence. Having found a few bones of an extinct species of animal, he set himself to work to construct the perfect skeleton. Little attention was paid to his performance at the time, but some years afterward, a complete skeleton of that singular animal, the Plesiosaurus, was discovered and found almost exactly to correspond with Mr. Conybeare's drawing. The backbone and skull are by far the most important among the bones. They are the caskets in which are deposited the spinal marrow and brain. Indeed, to protect the nervous system from injury seems in every instance the first intention of the formation of a skeleton. The spine or backbone is composed of 24 smaller bones, between the most of which is a layer of gristle. so that while the indispensable condition of great strength is preserved, a degree of motion is allowed. The weight of the upper parts of the body presses down this gristle during the day, thus accounting for the singular fact that persons are always shorter at night than in the morning soon after getting up. The loss in height in different individuals varies from half an inch to 1 or 2 inches. I know a gentleman who habitually loses in height from 1/2 to 3/4 of an inch every day, and while speaking on the subject, told me an anecdote relative to the practice pursued by the British recruiting sergeants, who, when they found a man willing to enlist not more than half an inch under the requisite height, made him lie in bed and fed him well for 2 or 3 days, by which time his gristle became well swelled out, and he was almost invariably sure to pass muster when immediately presented at the station house. Every little protuberance and ridge we see on bones give origin or hold to muscles which attach themselves by means of strings or tendons. There are nearly 500 distinct muscles named by anatomists in the human body. This is probably underrating the real number, for a caterpillar has over 4,000 muscles, and there are 1,000 in the proboscis of an elephant. Muscles are composed of layers of cellular tissue, the compression of which at the ends forms tendons, while the cells in the middle are filled with fibrin. The mode in which the nerves act on the mobility of muscles, so as to cause them to thicken or contract, is well shown in this cut. One part of the muscle is attached to the forearm, and the other to the head of the arm. As it gradually contracts and shortens, on oneself the hand approaches the head. When the human germ or embryo is first excited to action, it is not as large as a pin's head, yet, even small as it is, the life power is in vigorous exercise. It stations deputations of its properties in the proper places to form their own instruments of action, out of the minute pulp. In a short time the heart and blood vessels are formed to carry nutriment to every part, and the bones, muscles, and other organs appear in succession. Its first care is to perfect all the arrangements that are necessary for purposes of nutrition, which arrangements you will understand better in the adult than in the infant, in whom the parts are out of proportion. When food is taken in the mouth, the saliva is poured out from manufactories of that substance. It mixes with the food, not only softening it, but also effecting on it an actual change, which is the first real act of digestion. When this fluid is deficient, its want is imperfectly supplied in the other processes of assimilation. This cause alone would account for the dyspepsia so prevalent among tobacco chewers and smokers, who wantonly exhaust a supply intended for other purposes than the filthy use to which they apply it. The second act is performed by the stomach, into which the food descends from the mouth by means of a long tube, esophagus, composed of a series of muscular rings, which by contracting constantly above push it before them. When there, the gastric fluid is poured out on it, completely dissolving the whole and changing it into a grayish-looking fluid called chyme. The stomach then contracts, closing up the opening by which it entered. and thus forcing it out through the other orifice. Soon after entering the intestines, a fluid is poured out through a tube. This fluid is composed of the secretion of the liver, bile, and another secretion from the pancreas, sweetbreads, each sending a tube from itself, the tubes uniting into a common duct before opening into the intestines. The liver has a repository for bile, called the gallbladder, so that it is capable of performing its part in digestion at any moment. It is supposed by many that the juice from the pancreas merely dilutes the bile, but this is not very probable. This juice, when poured on the chyme, separates it into two parts, the chyle and excrement. The chyle at this stage so much resembles milk as to take its name from a Greek word meaning that article. It is instantly sucked up by millions of little leech-like vessels called milk carriers, lacteals from lactis, milk, which convey it to the mesenteric glands to be further elaborated, leaving them. It is carried to a duct and finally mixed with a reservoir of venous blood in the neck, from whence it enters the upper cavity of the right heart, is thrown into the lower cavity, and then taken into the lungs to receive the last stage of purification. Arrived at the lungs, it throws out carbonic acid and takes in supply of oxygen. It is then thrown into the upper cavity of the left heart, which contracts, sends it into the lower cavity, from whence the aorta receives it, and then it makes its rounds in the system to supply the wants of every part. Chemists tell us that an atom of pure blood is composed of 18 different elements, and also that the atoms resemble a spangle in shape, being thin and circular, with a dot of iron in the middle, occasioning Dr. Good's remark that the wheels of life ran on iron axles. The arteries subdivide to an excessively minute degree, and the extreme branches terminate in little bladders. Each of these little bladders or globular cells has 3 openings, one for the artery, one for a vein, and one for an absorbent. When an atom of blood arrives in one of them, the absorbent takes from it what is required and works it up to suit its own purposes. What is left is immediately sucked up by the vein and carried off, to be again mixed with the elaborated food and passed through the lungs. You will remember my mentioning, when speaking of the development of the embryo, the fact of deputations of the life power being stationed in different places to form their own instruments of action. These instruments are called glands, and their office is to secrete from the blood the different fluids required in the system. They are merely a greater or lesser number of bundles of little bladders, acting in the mode I have just mentioned, and endowed with specific properties to make certain substances. Thus, the liver secretes bile, the lacrimal gland tears, and the salivary gland spittle, and the inside coat of the stomach, the gastric juice. Sure. The gastric juice. Where is my gastric juice? I posted a poll on the thingy, and now I can't find my spot. Here it is. Here is a cut showing the mode in which the blood vessels ramify. I wish you to carefully examine these cuts and the accompanying descriptions, as too much minuteness in describing the anatomy of the organs while explaining the functions would have made the subject very difficult of comprehension. I think I understand the nutritive functions now, and I am glad to think that nothing but the nervous system remains between us and the sleepers in the Egyptian temples, to whom I am impatient to return. But I should like to know, if anything injurious should enter into the channels of the circulation, how the blood would get rid of it. By means of the skin, kidneys, and lungs, which are all excreting glands or organs that throw off offending matters. But to pursue our subject, we must examine the nervous system. This cut of it will give you an idea of the ramifications of the nerves over the surface of the system. The nerves, like every other part of our system when forming, begin at the circumference and grow toward the center, as shown here. Those of the lower extremities unite in distinct bundles before entering the spine. Proceeding upward, we find nerve after nerve running into the backbone through holes bored for their reception. Show the nerves as they come from the superior extremities or arms, those of the neck. The spinal canal is already filled when the nerves enter it by two kinds of nervous matter, the white and the gray. The latter is supposed to be the origin of sensation and motion, as we invariably find, by tracing the nerves to their terminations, that they end in it, and we know the nerves are nothing more than communicating media. By your course of reason, I would conclude that cutting the nerve of a part before it entered the gray matter would destroy all sensibility in that part, and motion as well. All distinct masses of the gray matter in the body are termed ganglia. The spinal cord, from its lowest part to some distance upward in the neck, is composed of two ganglia, sensation and motion. With regard to cutting the nerves, that has been done so often and so invariably with the same result that it has become an established point in science of no sensation of any kind existing, except as connected with a superior essence. Sensation in the lower animals seems even on a par with their intelligence. The gadfly, Dr. Good remarks, when it fastens on the hand, can be cut to pieces without its experiencing any apparent pain, and the idea of Shakespeare has been long ago exploded, that the poor worm thou treadest on, in corporeal suffering, feels a pang as great as when a giant dies. The nerve of sensation and that of motion are bound in the same sheath till within a short distance of the spinal cord they then separate, and each enters its own ganglion. This cut shows a front section of the spinal cord and nerves. At the upper part of the spinal marrow, we find a series of ganglia in pairs, one set behind the other in regular order, and always found in the same relations to their parts. These are the ganglia of the special senses. So much has observation been directed to these points, and so true and unvarying in its nature, that by examining the size of the ganglia of the animal, we can tell the degree of perfection the several senses have attained. In the eagle we find the optic ganglion large, in the hound the olfactory, in the rabbit the auditory, and in all instances the same result holds. The nerves supplying the teeth come from the 3 branch of the 5 pair marked in the side view. Many of the lower animals have only 2 ganglia, sensation and motion. As we ascend the scale and find animals possessed of special senses, so do we find the corresponding ganglia present. Still ascending, we find a new pair of ganglia, which I will denominate those of instinctive intelligence, for in proportion as the animal exhibits marks of intelligence, do these ganglia increase in size, and the enlargement gives shape to the skull. So small is this in some animals that they have a perfectly flat skull on a line with the spine. As we will ascend the scale, it continually enlarges and the skull protrudes above the spinal column, as may be seen in the dog and the horse. In a man, the ganglia of instinctive intelligence, or, according to Coleridge, of understanding, is out of all proportion as regards size to the others. It covers them all, its bulging in front forming the forehead. One might find some excuse in what you are saying for the Eastern ideas of transmigration, a constant and perfect ascent from the very lowest germ of life to a man would give rise to some ideas of its being one identical spirit, an immortal being undergoing its education for eternity, and in the highest and last stage of material maturity, preparing for its future spiritual existence. You will be much surprised to find that the brain of the child before birth is not the miniature brain of the man, but, on the contrary, rises, as you have just guessed, from the lowest to the highest, passing through the grades of animated existence, till it arrives at the present state in man, and even then continues growing, if cultivated, as many well-attested cases have fully demonstrated. The head of Napoleon, after he became emperor, was much larger than it was some years previous, a fact shown by 2 busts of him, now at Paris, taken at different periods. A Scotch gentleman once informed me that the eldest son among the aristocracy of Great Britain is titled from birth, and at the death of his father receives the honours of the deceased without any delay, but that with the heir to the throne it was entirely different. He must be made a knight, a baron, an earl, etc., gradual and successive steps giving him rank, the laws, unless those preliminaries are observed, declaring him without any. I have never made inquiry to know whether this matter was so or not, but, at any rate, it illustrates the stages of the lords of creation, as they styled themselves. You have destroyed transmigration, as there could be no occasion of retracing the steps if once gone over. Conversation 4. Double Life of Man. You will remember the care of the life power, when first excited, to complete all the arrangements required in nutrition. These arrangements are called by anatomists the organs of vegetable or organic life. Such are the stomach, liver, heart, arteries, vein, kidneys, etc. Another set is required for the soul. The organs composing of it are called the organs of animal life. Such are the brain and voluntary muscles. To recall your former comparison, everything that relates to keeping the house in good order and feeding its inmates would belong to the vegetable organs, while the animal are devoted to obeying the commands of the soul. You comprehend my meaning? The apparatus in animals that pertains to nutrition, though indirectly influenced by the brain, is a system within itself, having its own sense of nerves and ganglia. Its ganglia differ from those of animal life in being a reddish-gray color and lying among the soft parts. They are distributed from the orbit of the eye to the lower part of the backbone, and have a grand center or brain called the semilunar ganglion, which lies behind the stomach. So sparsely are the nerves of sensation given to the organs of vegetable life that in surgical operations there is little or no pain felt after the skin is cut. Harvey, the demonstrator of the circulation of the blood, was acquainted with a young nobleman who from disease had the heart so exposed that it could even be handled while beating. He found to his astonishment that unless his fingers came in contact with the outer skin, the young man was altogether unconscious of the heart being touched. The cut on page 65 shows the ganglionic system of organic life. Has a distinct separation ever taken place between the two sets of organs, so that one acted while the other was quiescent? Yes, and quite enough to prove that the body and mind can exist independently of each other. In concussion of the brain, sensation, thought, and locomotion, the functions of animal life are entirely passive, while the organic continue with the usual activity and regularity. Sleep, which I will refer to again in a short time, affords a less striking instance. Dr. Good remarks that in cases of suspended animation by hanging, drowning, or catalepsy, the vital principle continues attached to the body after all the vital functions cease to act, often for half an hour, and sometimes for hours. In the year 1769, Mr. John Hunter, being then 41 years of age, of a sound constitution and subject to no disease except a casual fit of the gout, was suddenly attacked with a pain in the stomach, which was shortly succeeded by a total suspension of the action of the heart and lungs. By the power of the will, or rather by violent striving, he occasionally inflated the lungs, but over the heart he had no control whatever. Nor, though he was attended by 4 of the chief physicians in London from the first, could the action of either be restored by the medicine. In about 3/4 of an hour, however, the vital actions began to return of their own accord, and in 2 hours he was perfectly recovered. Sir Everard Home observed that in the attack there was a suspension of the most material involuntary actions. Even involuntary breathing was stopped, while sensation, with its consequences as thinking and acting with the will, were perfect, and all the voluntary actions were as strong as ever. Dendy mentions cases in which this power of disconnection was voluntary. Colonel Townsend's case was one of undoubted authority. That officer was able to suspend the action of both his heart and lungs, after which he became motionless, icy cold, and rigid, a glassy film overspreading his eyes. As there was no breathing, the glass held over his mouth showed no apparent moisture. Though all consciousness would pass away, Yet the colonel could reanimate himself when he chose. Dr. Cleghorn relates the case of a man who could stop the pulse at his wrist and reduce himself to the condition of fainting by his will. Though it is only in rare cases that the will has any power over the nutritive organism, yet the emotions always exercise a very considerable influence. Everyone has experienced the manner in which ill news spoils the appetite. Some cases of the effects of imagination in producing fear, and thus exciting disease, we have already reviewed, but a few more will not be out of place here. Platerus tells us of some girls playing near a gibbet, when one of them threw stones at a criminal suspended on it. Being violently struck, the body swung, and the girl, believing it was alive and was descending from the gibbet, fell into violent convulsions and died. Westclough was detained as a hostage by the Kalmucks, and was carried along with them in the memorable flight to China. His widowed mother had mourned him as dead, and on his sudden return the excess of joy was fatal instantaneously. In the year 1544, the Jewish pirate Cynemus Tafuris was lying in a port of the Red Sea called Orsino, and was preparing for war, being then at variance with the Portuguese. While he was there, he received the unexpected intelligence that his son, who in the siege of Tunis had been made prisoner by Barbarossa, and by him doomed to slavery, was suddenly ransomed, and coming to his aid with 7 ships well armed, he was immediately struck as if with apoplexy, and expired on the spot. The same effect was produced upon the doorkeeper of Congress during the Revolution, who, on hearing the news of a victory won by his countrymen, fell back and expired in ecstasy. I suppose it is the ganglion of the understanding that phrenologists map the seats of the various properties of mind. It is. They say that if there are separate ganglia for the special senses, which are, after all, but mere modifications of general sensibility, why should not the same plan hold good in locating the different properties of the mind, which may be called the special senses of the understanding, and the anatomical analogies favor this view. It had been said before phrenology was known that the faculty by which the astronomer calculated eclipses was as distinct in his mind, and preserved its individuality as much as in the eye of his body. It would also account for the influence of habit, our constant pursuit of one object fostering the germ of organ to maturity. What is the brain made of? Its chemical constitution is principally albumin. It is formed of an immense number of arteries, veins, and nerves. Dr. Gall was the first to completely unravel its complex web, which he was enabled to do after hardening its substance by long continued boiling in oil. Thank you for letting me read to you. Please check out the description for where to buy my art, where to watch my movie, and where to send me a one-time donation, and I will see you tomorrow.